In Ecuador, the election silence is in place 3 days before the presidential elections in the country. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court for having issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu. And UNICEF denounced that over 1 million Gazan children are facing psychological trauma after more than 15 months of genocide at hands of Israel. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Belén de los Santos. I'm from the teleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. In Ecuador, the election silence started on Friday at 3 days before the polls at the country. Near 14 million Ecuadorians are eligible to vote next Sunday, February 9th, so that they can decide among the candidates who is best for running the nation's future. These general elections will be held amid instability triggered by political violence, energy crisis, and the accusations against President Daniel Noboa for not being abided by electoral rules. The National Electoral Council announced that the voting process initiated on Thursday with the suffrage of those who are deprived of freedom without fixed sentence, and it will continue this Friday with the home voting process for people with physical limitations. And we go now to Venezuela as President Nicolás Maduro reiterated his denunciation of the acts of corruption of the extreme right wing in the country, stressing that the sanctions requested by this sector have robbed the country of more than $600 billion. During the closing of the 5th Congress of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the president announced that in the last few years, the country has been in the presence of an extreme right wing that used politics to enrich itself. In this sense, the Venezuelan head of state condemned the terrorist actions that this group has promoted in the country, promoting violence and economic destabilization. President Nicolás Maduro also stated that with these actions, they forced Venezuelan families to migrate to other countries, profiting with their groups of coyotes who were in charge of mobilizing migrant citizens.
Porque si estamos diciendo,
because if we are saying that they pocketed $31,000 million directly, that they put their hand in the pocket of the gringos with their actions of sanctions and blockades, they made the country lose more than $630,000 million.
Más de 630.000 millones de dólares en lo que llaman los abogados el lucro cesante. Más de 600.000 millones.
They forced thousands of families to leave the country and set up mafia companies of coyotes to take them first to Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, and down there. And then, in the year 2021-2022, the same companies of coyotes, directed by these same people, will take them to the United States.
And now we have a short break coming up, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South, and we now go back to Ecuador with days to go before the election in the country, and we now welcome Juan Carlos Valarezo. He's chair of the International Relations Department at the Catholic University of Ecuador. Thank you, Juan Carlos, for joining us here in From the South.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Juan Carlos, tell us, what do we know at this point about what's coming on Sunday?
Well, what we do know for sure is that this may end up in a runoff between the two top candidates. There are over 16 candidates running for the presidential election. However, it is well known that there are two that are at the top, Daniel Noboa and the contender Luisa González.
So just to get a little bit deeper into what is going on in Ecuador, we have been seeing a year that was marked by different sort of crisis, and insecurity is one of the main topics in the country. So tell us, how does that play into this election? We've been seeing different measures taken by President Noboa in the last few days. How do you see this impacting the results on Sunday?
I consider that this is the definite topic that it would determine who people vote for, right? I think it's very important the fact that we analyze how the candidates have addressed the issue of insecurity. On the part of Daniel Noboa, we see a continuation of a policy that has proven not to be that effective, right? The militarization of the conflict and the problem has turned out into more violence. There's now evidence that the criminal organizations have become stronger, and they are now more present all over the country. So apparently his approach has not resulted in the expected results. In addition to that, the proposals that Luisa González gives are not that clear regarding how to control the problem with insecurity and drug trafficking. Her speech resembles a lot to the speech from, the Revolución Ciudadana's era 10, 15 years ago. So in my view, I think it also needs to adapt to the current demands of the people. We have to consider that there are a number of people that are undecided and still haven't made up their mind about who to vote for.
So we are trying to, just day before the elections, bring to our international audience just the key topics to understand the situation in Ecuador before this polls. So the energy crisis has also been on the news, both nationally and internationally. So I wanted to ask you, what is the situation at the moment in this regard? And again, how could this impact the results on Sunday?
Well, I think what Ecuador went through in the last year or so with the blackouts and the lack of energy in different parts of the country due to climate change and stuff. But also I would agree with many that consider that it is also a mismanagement of the resources, a bad planning of the issue. How Daniel Noboa handled it, I think, was very reactive. I don't think it was propositive. I don't think it was proactive in terms of looking at different solutions. And the ones that were taken seem to have, cut the problem, but not to the root, because the Engineers Association has already said that it is very likely that we'll have blackouts again in April. The problem here is a very complex one, because we need energy, we need different sources, alternative sources of energy as well, and that's something that they need to consider.
And from what you were saying, I gather that one of the key aspects to get into and analyze what's happening on Sunday has to do with how the people evaluate how the current president has dealt with this sort of crisis in the country. So, of course, Ecuador is at an exceptional mandate at the moment, because actually Luisa González and also Daniel Noboa faced each other just a couple of years ago to end what was Lazo's term. So this situation may be repeated on Sunday. How does this moment compare to that one in which, of course, Daniel Noboa was the winner? And how could what you were saying in terms of the evaluation of this short mandate come to play at what will be a new edition of that poll?
Well, I think you're totally right, right? A lot of people are evaluating now Daniel Noboa's actions as a president, and many are disenchanted with what he proposed and what he did. In fact, we see that he still has a very strong base of supporters. In fact, he leads all of the polls previous to last week that were officially over, and it says a lot as well about the bases that support Luisa Gonzalez, which is also a very strong base, but also with the context of supporting Rafael Correa, right? So we see here a polarization of support. However, what's grown in the last year, I think it's the number of people that are undecided. This will be the determining factor to see whether Daniel Noboa or Luisa Gonzalez end up in the first place. Many speculate that this will be a victory in the first ballot of the election. I highly doubt that, but we'll see, because as you know, with the recent elections in the US as well, polls are really not to be trusted that much.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Juan Carlos Valareso. We were talking about the elections that are coming on Sunday. It's a pleasure to have you here in From the South.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much.
So now we will go to a short break, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. We continue with more information. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Honduras, Enrique Reina, presented on Thursday before the United Nations agencies a program of attention designed by the executive branch to assist migrants expelled by the government of the United States. The Migration Governance Council, which is made up of several institutions, has presented one of its most important plans to UN agencies. The comprehensive program Hermano Hermana Vuelve a Casa, or Brother and Sister Come Home, focused on strengthening the legal coverage of their nationals in the United States, protecting and assisting the most vulnerable migrants, and promoting their social and economic integration. And it was discussed with the multi-state agencies to define their participation in each of them. And the President of the United States, Donald Trump, imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court, the ICC, for having issued arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This order was carried out in the context of the visit to the White House of the Israeli Prime Minister, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for the genocide against Gaza. The Trump administration alleges that the court issued unwarranted arrest warrants for Netanyahu, in addition to asserting that the investigations against Israel pose an extraordinary threat to U.S. national security and foreign policy. It is important to note that the United States and Israel are not part of the court and do not recognize it. And precisely, we go to the situation in the Middle East. The United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF, denounced that over 1 million Gazan children are facing psychological trauma after more than 15 months of genocide at hands of Israel. The Zionist aggression has killed more than 61,000 Palestinians since October of 2023, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. The death toll has left over 38,000 orphan children who now deal with the sequels of the genocidal operation. In this context, UNICEF alerted on the magnitude of the humanitarian situation in the Strip and the challenges that Palestinians currently face, including the lack of clean water, food, and basic services and commodities. In this regard, UNICEF stressed that the entry of humanitarian aid is insufficient to meet the demand of their needs. And in other news, 80 years ago, Soviet soldiers took Berlin to end to the Second World War. However, Chancellor Olaf Scholz declared that he was grateful to the United States for liberating his country from the Nazis. From Moscow, our colleague Oleg Yasinski with more.
Hace 80 años, los soldados soviéticos tomaron Berlín.
80 years ago, Soviet soldiers took Berlin to end the Second World War. For the Soviet Union, this was the Great Patriotic War, costing millions of soldiers and civilian lives. An inconvenient truth for the West today, whose leaders, such as the United States President and the German Chancellor, openly deny and misrepresent it.
So my view is that Germany has a good reason to take the responsibility that comes from the bad past. We are very happy about the United States that freed our country and helped us to become a democracy again.
Cambiar la historia se ha convertido de hecho.
Changing history has in fact become a weapon against Russia. Demerit the effort and sacrifice of the Western Soviet people to justify United States hegemony on the European continent.
En el continente europeo.
Scholz wants to insult the Russian people, intentionally, to please the U.S. deep state. This is part of his policy, mandated by the previous U.S. administration.
My best prizes were for the victory over Germany and for the capture of the city of Berlin.
Russia was also not invited to the 80th anniversary celebrations of the liberation of Auschwitz by the Soviet Army. Its absence from the commemoration events is more than an insult to the memory of those who gave their lives to save the world from Nazism. Rewriting history to suit political interests is a way of creating new conflicts.
Es una forma de crear nuevos conflictos.
In the concentration camp, people came up to us. They wanted to touch the stars. They were trying to convince themselves that the Russians had come and liberated them. They were all like skeletons. It was impossible to stay there for more than 3 minutes. It was scary to watch. It was impossible.
With the authority of the Soviet Union, they had no chance for revenge. And now, for the first time in many decades, they have the opportunity. And they are taking advantage of it in every possible way. It is enough to listen to the absolutely disgusting statements of almost all European leaders. And first of all, the French, Germans, and English.
Las palabras de Scholz son una ofensa no solo para Rusia.
Scholz's words are an offense not only to Russia, but to thousands of anti-fascist Germans, the real heroes of their people who went to the death camps together with communists and Jews, and those who managed to save their lives. It was thanks to the Red Army.
Al Ejército Rojo. Oleg Yasinski, teleSUR, Moscú.
And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and also join us on our social media. For teleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.